This should be a pretty interesting video. I'm going to be showing you how to make a simple mold. It's just a straight pull mold that we're going to be making, and it's not going to cost very much money. It's something that should give very high quality, consistent results with the castings that you make. It should last a long time, cost a couple of bucks. This is a good one. Stick around. Let's talk a little bit about mold making process here. So what you see here is a polyurethane mold. Pretty rugged one. It's had 1,000 or more castings through it, and it basically shows no signs of wear whatsoever. Polyurethane is probably the single best thing for concrete casting. It's expensive. It's a technical product. There's a lot of stuff that you need to know. It's very hard to get your hands on the stuff, but it's probably the best thing. Silicone could be the best thing depending on what you're doing, because it's a little bit more flexible, it's a little bit more delicate than a polyurethane. If the two were exactly the same, the polyurethane mold would be able to cast more before it starts to look a little rough around the edges and you lose a little bit of your detail. The silicone's kind of a softer material, so it wouldn't be as good for like the larger stuff or super longevity, but delicate fine stuff, that's what it would be good for. Stuff even finer than for silicone, it could be like latex or something like that. There's a lot of options in the world of making molds, but kind of the biggest problems are going to be like, what can you get, where can you get it, and then find a way to use it. Here's something that you can definitely get. It's super cheap, and this should work to make a nice, easy, simple, straight pull mold. We're not going to use the polyurethane. It's just going to be an example here. So basically, to make this, how we got here is I just start with some modeling clay from the dollar store, and you sculpt it up, and this one's, kind of like a maybe 30% done kind of stage. And you can put words or pictures. It's, all relative to how artistic you are. And in my case, I'm approximately this artistic. I made this happy little fellow here, and my grandmother wanted one. So I said, all right, well, I got to figure out how to make a mold of this. And I made a polyurethane mold, and it worked great. And I love it, but I don't know how much it cost, but it was a lot of money because you have to find the kit. I have to drive, 2 hours away to find a supplier who even sells this stuff being smooth on brand polyurethane mold making kits. What we're going to use here today is something a lot more readily available. Silicone, type 1 silicone, not acrylic caulking, not type 2 silicone. There's a bunch of different stuff out there, and all of it's wrong. Just type 1 silicone. Here's a big thing that you want to see right at the end of my finger there. 100% silicone. It has to say it on there because it needs to be 100% silicone. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a light skin of a silicone cast, not something like as robust as this. And then probably I'm going to go ahead and just make like a backing for it out of mortar or plaster or something like that, just to give it some rigidity and that kind of thing. So it'll be like a 2-stage mold when it's finished, whereas this could kind of like a one piece right here. But before we can do that, we need to talk about something very important. This was a bunch of hard lessons I had to learn, so maybe I can fast track you. This is concrete. I know it's red, so don't let that fool you. It's just some pigment in there. It's a very dense finish to this. It doesn't readily absorb water. It almost repels it a little bit, even though concrete is a porous substance, because of how consolidated the surface material is here. And that's from using a slurry product to get a really fine detail, no pock marks or honeycombing in the finished product here. All that stuff is great, and it will help this thing to demold. But if I just go ahead and put silicone right on here, I don't think you're going to get it off. I think it's going to probably break the piece or rip your silicone before you can demold it. And that's probably a repeating story here that you're going to hear a lot if you start getting into mold making, is making sure you do the extra steps that you need to make sure that you can debond these dissimilar materials that you're working with. Silicone, polyurethane, latex, things like that, they're pretty unforgiving. Sometimes you get it on a surface and it's pretty much stuck there forever. I've had that experience happen as well. So some of the ways that we're going to avoid this. You might think, well, you've got this concrete. Could I put a concrete sealer on it? You could. It wouldn't hurt at all, but it's not going to help enough. Another thing that you can do, something you should do, universal release agent or some form of other spray release agent. But it's still not enough on its own. Not even if I put 2 or 3 coats of it on there, letting it dry in between each coat. It's not going to be enough because the concrete's too porous and it's going to want to absorb some of that silicone on the microscopic level, and you're just not going to be able to debond them. So the way that I have found to have the most success when I'm making molds of something that's made out of concrete is to use a paste wax. So a paste wax product like this, I can paint it on. You don't want it thick. You don't want it globbed on. Basically as thin as you can get it, and then scrape off all of the extra. And then you kind of let that dry for a little while. That would be a great way to seal up, the pores in this concrete to really help create a plane for delamination between the 2 layers, the silicone that we're going to add and the concrete that we've got now. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll just paste some of this stuff on here, and then we'll let her set up for a little bit. Nothing too fancy to see there. And I'll go ahead and I'll paint some, around the thing that I'm making the mold of as well, just to make sure that I, can get everything apart when all this is over. I think we've got something that looks really good there. Before I proceed, I want to let that sit for just a little bit. And right now it's very liquidy. After a short while, if it's cool enough in here, it's pretty warm in my studio right now, hopefully that will skin over a little bit. And that's the point at which I go ahead and apply my universal release agent. And after that is when we can proceed to look at this silicone situation. And it is a little more complicated than just blasting some silicone on there. I mean, maybe you could do that with some measure of success, but there are a few technical steps that we can take that are going to give you better, finer details, better control over what you're doing here, and ultimately just better success with the finished product. Stick around for that. Okay, we're back a short while later here. Let's talk about what we're going to do before we do it. And before we do that, let's talk about one more thing. Okay, so when you're making a mold like this, you have to be conscious of overhanging. And what I mean by that is this is a straight pull mold. And while there is some give in a silicone product, like it's going to flex a little bit as you demold, if you have too much undercutting, basically the part that you're trying to peel away is smaller than the piece of concrete that it's wrapped around, and ultimately it's going to tear that off and break it. You're going to, like for something like this, if I did it wrong, you would demold it and the nose breaks every time, or the lips break every time I demold it. And that would be probably because in the initial design, I didn't really consider properly the fact that I'm going to be doing a straight pull with this. If you want to do more technical molds and more challenging shapes, there are ways to do it. It's a very deep subject, mold making, but we're kind of going for like a simple one here. It just kind of peels right out. And yours doesn't have to look like this. It can look like anything, but try to minimize on the undercuts. So as for what we're going to do to this thing, we're going to be applying 2 layers of silicone. This process stinks to high heaven, so I'm telling you all about it first so I can gear up, get started, and once I'm going, I just want to finish this thing as quick as possible and get it outside to cure overnight, because it's just going to smell awful, and it's like a acrid vinegar-like smell. It's bad for your eyes as well as your skin and breathing, so you have to really gear up and protect yourself. Use fans, have adequate ventilation, and in my case, just kind of, do it quickly and get it out of here, and then, minimizing the amount of smell that you're going to make. So the 2-step process here is going to be using mineral spirits, which in and of themselves smell terrible. And we're going to be using that to thin some silicone. Add some silicone to a container, add a small amount of mineral spirits, and just work it and work it and work it. It takes a minute, it doesn't work right away, but if you just keep working it and keep, working out all the clumps of silicone, it'll eventually thin it entirely. And we're not going for a full, self-leveling liquid here. We just want something a little thinner than what silicone out of this container is going to give us, because I want to use a paintbrush and apply it to this piece to make sure we're getting it in all to the nooks and crannies and whatnot. And if you don't thin it, I find that you can leave brush lines or other imperfections, and maybe you could get away with it with a pretty simple product that you're making a mold from. This is kind of asking a lot from just a tube of silicone, as opposed to something that you're paying a lot more money for to have a flowable, pourable rubber that will cure at any thickness. You kind of can't have your cake and eat it too here. So because this is a less expensive process, we have to do a couple more steps to try to ensure that it's going to work. And even still, I don't know, I'm maybe 80% confident this is going to result in a mold that is of high enough quality that I would actually use it all the time, as opposed to, oh, another experiment, it didn't work. 80%. I think it should work. And as I said, this is kind of asking a lot. If you had basic geometric shapes, blocks, things like that, it's going to work a lot better for that. When you get into the super detailed stuff, the more expensive molding rubbers are probably worth the money. A lot of people really like the latex, multiple layers of latex with like a fiberglass resin over it, something like that. There's a lot of different approaches that you could take. So I'm going to go ahead and get geared up here, get going on this. Once I'm going, I'm going to try to not stop and talk too much and just get it done as quickly as possible. Get it out of here. Let's get going. Cornstarch. Okay, here we are back a couple of days later. It's definitely all set up now. It was set up long before now even. So I mean, in theory, I could be done now, but you want to put some sort of backing to this, because once I turn it over and I fill it with concrete, the silicone doesn't have a lot of strength or rigidity. It'll kind of just bend and move under the weight of the concrete. So you want to give it a backing, and you could use a traditional plaster backing, or you could use fiberglass or any old thing. But I happen to have an awful lot of concrete around, or mortar specifically, and so I'm going to go ahead and put some of that on there. What I did is I just cut out the top of an old bucket here, and I'm going to apply a bead of silicone around this. I'm going to place it on top, and then I'm going to put a dry pack mortar mixture on top of that there, let it set up, and now I have a perfectly fit retainer to hold this silicone in place, so that when I pack it full of mortar and I'm vibrating it and doing all the stuff that you do to make a good casting, it's going to hold up to that. And basically, short of dropping the concrete and breaking it, this will last forever. And it's going to cost like pennies to make as well. So you probably don't even need the silicone around it. I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit just to stop it from leaking out on the sides. So I'm going to wipe off some of this extra cornstarch, not all of it, because I don't need to get rid of all of it, but a little bit. Then I'm going to apply the silicone, let that set up, and then I'll start making that dry pack mortar to put in there. Give that just a little bit of time to set up. Okay, here we're back. In the bucket, I have a mixture of 3 parts sand to 1 part Portland cement and some water. Now, mine is white sand and white Portland cement, so it looks a little different. It's the exact same thing, it just costs way more. I happen to have a bunch that I need to use, that's why I'm using it here. You can use any color, they'll all work. And the mix that I've gone for is kind of like a drier consistency. So this isn't like a regular cast where I'm gonna vibrate this and be very careful to get all the air bubbles out. I don't want any like huge air pockets, but really it's just kind of a rough shape here. It's overkill even for the application for what we need. You know, a thin layer of fiberglass would have done the same thing, but this was cheaper and easy for me. So I'm really not looking for any sort of finish at all on this. So I'm just going to use a damp sponge float here and just give it a rough texture to it. And there we go. So I'm going to let that set up, and we'll come back at a later time here and go ahead and start this demolding process. And here we are back about 24 hours later. You know, it's nowhere near fully set up or cured at 24 hours, but it was pretty warm, and I did use the white Portland cement, which sets up lightning quick. So we've got something that I think is going to be strong enough for the demolding process here. So let's talk about the demolding process a little bit. In terms of what you use to take it apart, well, a little bit of whatever you have or whatever you need to get the job done. I anticipate it to be a little bit resistant to the process of coming apart, but we'll get it there one way or another. So I've got some tools here that we'll probably use to help facilitate the process, and then maybe some extra ones which are purely for intimidation, which is a little tradesman trick here that I learned after a while of doing with this kind of stuff, because it typically doesn't come apart very easy. So sometimes you have to show it what's up. Let's get started. So I think that what we should have here is it should demold from the base pretty easily. The struggle will be to the bucket itself, which I can cut off, which I'm prepared to do, but you know, maybe it'll just come out otherwise, but let's give it a shot here. Okay, so the bucket comes clean off there. or sorry, the concrete portion comes clean off, and now we're left with two different pieces here. Which to deal with first? First of all, just make sure I got this lined up okay here. Yeah, right about like that. Something like that there, so I don't lose my orientation. Let's do the bucket first, because this might just pop right out. Oh, it is. It's going to pop right out of here. Lucky day. We use it again. So especially because this thing is fresh, it's not cured yet, it's not super strong. I don't want to expose it to any stress. I definitely could break it, and a little bit's fine. It just needs to be the receiver for this relatively flimsy mold that we've made here, and it should work just fine like that. So we'll let that be, and we'll switch our attention over here. I expect this process to be a little bit harder than the last one, but let's see where we're at. Okay, so far so good. Now this silicone works great for this stuff, and it's pretty flexible and malleable, but it's not the same thing as like a high quality purpose-made urethane or silicone pourable rubber material. You know, we're kind of using the bargain basement approach here, so you have to be careful with this thing. It would be pretty easy to tear it. You know, it's fairly resilient, but much like maybe a balloon, once it kind of starts to go, it just runs. So you got to be careful to not stress it out too much here. It was very thin in that one spot and threatening to tear even just under light pressure, so that's why I kind of just filleted it off there a little bit. The edges have come cleanly away, so far so good. Nice clean demold, so that means we did a good job. If you didn't do a good job sealing the surface that you cast this to, or you put this silicone on, you'd be knowing it right now because it wouldn't be coming off cleanly. It's taken some of the red color off, but that's something that will wash away over time. Probably the first one or two you put through it will have a little bit of that red residual, even if you wash it delicately with some soap and water. But not the end of the world. Oh, there we go. Okay. We've got something that is, honestly, I would call it, because I have, you know, a much more expensive one, but like we're 95% of the way there in terms of the way that it's pulled this texture off. There is a defect. You can actually see where it is right here. Look at that. Right where the mouth is. There was a very thin layer from the paste, but not enough backing to it. So what would have solved that? What would have made this better? For sure I know the answer. I didn't place the piece on the board with silicone. I just sat it there. And as I was applying the silicone, I couldn't use force because I was just trying to have to hold it there with a finger and whatever. What would have been superior would have been to take the time and put some silicone, place it on the board, and let it set. And what that would have allowed me to do is use a little bit more force as I applied that, you know, ooey gooey sticky mess of the silicone over top. And with a little bit more force, I bet you I wouldn't have had that tiny little defect there, because the rest of this pull has turned out great. Let me see if I can just figure out how to orient this. I think that's pretty much it there. So I'm going to clean it up a little bit there. I might even explore trying to fix that, you know, small imperfection here, especially because it's very central into the smile. You know, it's a very noticeable location. If it were towards the edges, I definitely would just ignore it completely. I could do a couple of things. I could take an extremely sharp razor knife, like a brand new blade, and you could make slight alterations, but I'm never really happy about doing that. And it's definitely like you get one shot at it, so it's not a good solution. What I might try to do is take a tiny little dab of silicone and see if I can't just manually repair that. It probably won't be that hard to do. The two layers won't bond. They will delaminate between the layers, but depending on the shape that I'm filling here, it's somewhat of a void. So if I fill it, it might actually hold in place there. if I really wanted to fix this, I'd put a tiny little armature, like tiny little screws that I would thread into the existing where the head is exposed into where the new pore will be. And this will, act as a mechanical armature that will help to hold this tiny little repair in place here. Because otherwise, I'm really happy with this. This has turned out really well. So I'll probably go the extra mile to try to fix that. If you're more careful than I am, I bet you can make yours look perfect on the first go. Let's go ahead and clean this up. Let's make one. Let's cast one. Let's see how it turns out. I bet you want to see that. I want to see it too, so stick around. Let's keep doing that. So here we are back. I've got in this bucket here a mortar, white cement and white sand. 2 parts white sand, 1 part white Portland cement, and water. No other additives, no admixtures, no plasticizers, nothing to that degree. Just a very, very basic mortar mix. And we're going to make a cast here. Haven't made any repairs or anything to this, just cleaned them up a little bit with a very, very light sanding and washed it down. I could have kept going to strip every little bit of this color out, and you wouldn't get this if you were casting a gray concrete piece. It was just because I have that red piece that I cast was very, very, very heavily modified with an iron oxide pigment and integral in the mix, so it kind of bleeds that stuff out. This is normal for working with that. So in terms of the coloration, it actually doesn't bother me. I'm not going to continue to sand and clean it because this is a delicate mold I've made. I don't want to wear away texture, rip it, or anything like that. So I'm going to use it to my advantage. I'm going to put a white mortar cast into it, and that will pull some of that red out of there each time I cast it, and it kind of looks good, like a little bit of a red blush on a face. It works well, so make it work for you, and that's what we're going to do here. After a couple of passes, this will eventually be gone, the red coloration that is. So what I've got here is water and white Portland cement, nothing else. And we're just going to make a little bit of a slurry paste. Pancake batter, it's kind of what we're going for. Very unprecise measurements. Just some Portland cement and some water. So that's what we've got here. I'm going to paste in a thin layer of this. Then before it dries and skins over, I'm going to apply my mortar on top. I'm going to have to work really quickly. It's 1,000,000 degrees in here today, approximately. And so this stuff will set up pretty quick. It's already setting up in the bucket, so I might as well get going here. When you paste in this slurry, this is going to help a lot to get a lot of the finer details out of your casts. It's also going to help to eliminate a lot of that honeycombing and air pockets that you can get. A lot of people use more advanced, more expensive products for casting, and that's not a bad idea. It's just expensive, and this is an example of just using the very, very base level of ingredients here. Really no admixtures or, expensive components. I'm using white cement, but you could use gray. It would be more cost effective. This slurry that goes in here, I want full coverage, but I don't want it super thick. I need these, recesses here. I don't really want it super thick, so I'm pulling out all of that pooling stuff. But now I got to get, actually maybe just a little bit more, little thin there. There we go. Okay, I like the look at that. Okay. Now let's go. Should be pretty good. With that slurry layer in there, I don't have to go too overkill. Now I'll just knock it flat here, and that'll be good enough. All right, I'm going to be happy with that. Leave it there. Let this set up, and then we'll demold it and see how this turned out. I like the rough finish on the backside here. I mean, you could trowel it smooth, do whatever works for you, but this is the way that I like to have my pieces. And we should have something that's a relatively defect-free finished product here. If I were being really critical of my design here, maybe I could have made the plastic ring a little bit bigger, had a little bit thicker of a concrete edge around the top side here. And as you can see, I've got a little bit of a crumbling issue happening here. And it's only because this is only 24 hours old and it's not a full consolidation because it was a dry mix and I kind of just loosely put it in there. If I were really concerned about it and I wanted to make the best quality thing I could and have it last a long time, I would have made the ring and the concrete a little bit larger all around to encapsulate this silicone mold a little bit better, and then I'm not going to damage it when I'm doing stuff like using my vibrator to consolidate the material. I mean, do what I say, not what I do, right? I think that's the saying. This is going to turn out really well. Stay tuned. Hopefully tomorrow is a little bit cooler than it is today because it's so hot. This thing will probably be ready to demold in like 15 minutes, but I'm going to call it a day, and I will see you tomorrow. And here we are back again. So it's been about 24 hours. It's not fully cured by any means, but it's very warm in here, so it's definitely set up enough that I can carefully demold it here. This mold in particular, I've had trouble with ever since the beginning. If I pull the mold too early, it's small areas around the mouth will chip and crack and break, and I'm already going to have that one defect at the mouth there that I'm going to have to fix. But let's just go ahead and demold it and see how it goes. Again, be mindful to not tear your silicone. Let's see how much of that red color it's pulled out. I expect a good amount. And then every time I cast one of these, it'll be a little bit less, and kind of I'll just make like a run or a series where I'll have a bunch of these white faces with like a red, you know, kind of blush to it, something like that. Don't want to force it. Some defects there a little bit. So, as you can see, not so good. Seems that he got a bullet hole to the eye there, and that's not the look I was going for. So that's a consolidation issue. That's not a result of the mold being a problem. That's a consolidation problem. So I always like to be critical of the stuff that I make. Let's talk about that defect and another defect that's opened up as well. So we have the one there, but now I have another one up here as well. What those are, again, both are the same problem in that I didn't have the casting piece placed with silicone, so it was moving around too much. I couldn't apply enough force, thereby to eliminate those air voids. So really it was just user error more than the process itself works if you're a little more careful with it. So since this guy's damaged anyway, if I didn't have that, I otherwise like him. He's pretty decent overall. I'd give him like, an 8 out of 10 or something like that. But what you would do here, I don't mind if my mold has extra cavities because now I have extra material on the product here. And you can always just remove some. You don't want to have to add more because you'll have a visible cold joint and it definitely won't look good. And this probably won't look good either, but it will look better than if you were to have not enough. Like right here, if I were to take a little, bit of mix and parge that in there, I mean, you'd always be able to see it. You're not going to be able to hide that. But with this kind of stuff here where I have just a little bit extra material, normally I would wait. You wait until this is 30 days old and you'll be able to get cleaner, straighter edges to it. Right now it's still green and it will break off in a flaky kind of way. So you can do some rough shaping, but you're not going to get your fine detail on it. It's getting a little better there. So I've taken down the high spots. I would leave it like that and I would wait until this is fully cured before I try to, use like a 220 grit sandpaper to smooth that out. As for the coloring, again, this is purely because I used a extremely augmented product there to make this cast from. But if it was a problem, you can just take some sandpaper and you can definitely take off a lot of that. If you use acid wash, you can take off all of it. You get the idea here. So, while my cast wasn't perfect, I think that this has been a success overall. If you try doing something like this yourself, again, just make sure that your placement's a little better and you can use a little bit more force, because as you can see, we've got 95% has worked out effectively there. This is an effective process. You can use it for simple mold castings, or you can use it for some more complex stuff. But if you are looking to do this regularly, you might want to invest in some products that are made application specific for this. Pourable urethane or silicone rubbers, which will cure at any thickness. That's a very important distinction. You know, I had to add cornstarch in order to work with this, and it makes a very short pot life, and the product is sticky and hard to work with. You know, a flowable, pourable rubber product that you can choose the exact grade of flexibility that you're looking for. I mean, that's a pretty big advantage. It is a pretty big step up in terms of your cost commitment, and it's certainly hard stuff to find depending on where you live. But smooth on brand pourable mold rubbers, urethane and silicone, I highly endorse them. If you can afford them and you can find them, use those. If you can't, this silicone one's a great workaround. Let's see if we can fix it. So again, reminder what we're dealing with up close before. I'm gonna try to fix up here and on the lip. We're not going for perfect here, but better would be nice. Okay, it's not perfect. It's not perfect, and you're not going to be able to see very much, but I'm going to show you anyway. Let's try to rotate it around. Maybe the light catches it in a way that you're able to see the little repairs I've made there. It actually went pretty well. Like I don't have much expectations for trying to repair a mold after the fact, but that went pretty well, and I suspect it's going to work. It certainly, absolutely is going to work for one casting. The hope is that maybe it works for multiple castings, and that maybe that, you know, this kind of just solves those defects there. Could be the case, but at the very least, we've made an effort here to improve the situation. So that is the repair process. If you have something like what I've had here, where, you know, you've got a pretty darn good mold, just a couple little defects, you want it to improve it. That silicone, because of the way that it fits into there, it doesn't bond really with a set silicone, but it does a pretty good job. And we should see some improvement here with the next one that we cast. And also I'll do a better job with it. Okay, here we are back again. Just want to show you the repairs there. I think you'll be able to see that. So basically the new silicone layer has done a pretty good job to adhere on there and make the repairs, and I definitely think it's going to work. But let's go ahead and cast one more here and see if we can't get it a little better. Right here I have some slurry, just white Portland cement, nothing else. And just before I put that in there, I just want to touch base for a second on using a release agent. Now, being that this is silicone, silicone is fairly resistant to having really anything stick to it, but I like to use this product here because I find it's kind of, as it says, universal mold release. It kind of works for all of the different stuff that I work with, whether it be, you know, polyurethane or silicone, whatever the case may be. I don't think you need it for this, but I do recommend using it, and I have used it here as I do with all of the casts that I make, just because it does help to release. It doesn't usually interfere with things like coloring or future sealer layers or anything like that. So let's go ahead and proceed here. I'm going to apply some of this white, but I'm also going to mix up a little bit of red slurry as well and paste that in there. This guy is red, and I was actually thinking, why don't I just devote this one to being red, because anytime I cast anything red, it makes a big mess of my molds. So now I have one that I can use for that specifically. Make sure I don't let that dry as I quickly mix in just a little bit of red here. Little goes a long way. This is just a 2-to-1 white sand to white Portland cement mix. So let's see if we get a little bit of a better finish on this one. I'll see you back one more time. And we're back again. So let's go ahead and demold this guy. Kind of excited to see how this one turned out. I like this one. Okay, an interesting color choice there, but ultimately I think that the important thing is that the mold's working. We're getting repeat castings out of it. It couldn't be a simpler or easier process in terms of how to make it. It's readily accessible. That's probably the number one benefit of this process here, is that you can get into casting and experimenting with fun stuff like that without a huge outlay in terms of money, or, you know, in a lot of areas it's really difficult to find the specialty products for pourable mold rubbers, but this is something that you can get anywhere. You can make, you know, really easy straight pull molds like this, or, you know, some more complicated stuff as well. Ready to go again? I had a little bit of this bonding slurry left with some color in it, so figured why not go ahead and pour one more of these guys here. Just let this one set up, and then we'll demold another one of these guys from the silicone mold. Okay, and here we are back again a few days later. Let's go ahead and demold this guy and see if this one turned out any better. I hope it did. Aha. Much better. That was just some latex paint mixed in with the white concrete mixture, but it's turned out pretty well there. That you can definitely see the imperfections. Take a good look there. Take a good look at the imperfections that I've created. And as I did with some of the other ones here, you can sand and buff them out to a certain degree. You can usually see that there's something funny going on in that area, especially when you're dealing with multiple colors. That usually you can definitely see it. But something like this is not so bad. Just a little bit of a light sanding there just to kind of even that out would be all right. But I mean, ideally, just make your mold perfect the first time around, and then you won't have this problem. I hope you found this tutorial on how to make a simple mold using basic ingredients like silicone at home to be helpful. And if you did, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Here we are back again. This one I put on a vibration table to see if we can't get a little bit tighter consolidation and less honeycombing. comparing that to, you know, our first one here. I'd say we're doing a little bit better. And this is probably a half dozen castings I've put through this cheap little silicone mold here, and it keeps working pretty well.